I believe in 10 years from now, most runners will be pacing themselves with power. Hey everyone, and welcome back on the channel. My name is Alex, and in today's video of the Advent Calendar, day 15, we are doing a video that was requested many times in the comments about this footpod, the Stryd Footpod. This is the footpod that I've been using now for, I believe, more than 4 years, and you have seen it in all of my videos on all my shoes that I'm testing. This is my training tool, and this is also the training tool with which most of my coach athletes are working. This is a footpod that gives you a reading of power on your watch. What is power? Power, in very scientific terms, is a lever times a force, and then you have a number expressed in watts, which in running translates to the amount of energy that you need to produce in order to move at a certain pace. So this is basically what power is. So this little pod gives you readings of watts on your watch. Why is it good? Why is it better than some other systems? Let's dive into this in one second. Just a quick disclaimer. This is not a sponsored video by Stryd. I bought all the pods that I've had, that Mary has, and although I'm listed on their website, we have no affiliation between me and them, and I'm doing this video even without them knowing about it. So this is completely transparent, and all the good and bad things that I will say about the pod are coming from me, as always, but good for you to make sure about it. Power for running, the amount of energy that you need to produce to move at a certain pace. This is not a video against working with paces or with heart rate. I'm just going to compare different systems. Why is power better than heart rate? Well, power, as proposed by the pod, as shown on your watch, is the instant representation of the work happening in your muscles. So it's not something that just happened or that will happen. It's the real-time representation of... no more pink light. It's the real-time representation of what's going on in your muscles, whereas heart rate is like the rear-view mirror of what just happened in your muscles. Essentially, there is a heart rate lag, so a time during which heart rate is lagging behind power, and that's simply because your heart muscle is compensating the effort that you just produced, and so it delivers a different output, which shows only a few seconds after the real-time work happened. This doesn't really matter for very long intervals, but for shorter stuff like 30 seconds or even 1 minute, sometimes you really see the heart rate lagging behind, and so if you were to train by heart rate, you would outpace your efforts simply because you would like to be in the right zone right off the bat, starting the interval, which actually would have you produce way more power, way more energy than you would need to for the sought training stimulus. And therefore you would actually be training too hard compared to what you should be doing for that amount of time. And that's because of the heart rate lag. Now, that's one of the reasons why heart rate is a bit off. Other reasons may include fatigue, different moments in the training block where your heart rate may not be the best representation of your fitness, and also, there's that drift in heart rate that you will encounter in most sessions where your heart rate will basically go slightly upwards throughout the session. And here again with the Stryd pod, you don't have to take this into account, or you don't have that flaw in your training execution, because again, you will train with the same value throughout the session, and there won't be any drift. So you won't be sort of taking into account something that actually shouldn't be taken into account. Why is power better than paces? It's not necessarily better than paces, simply With that Stryd pod, you have a number that takes into account the wind, headwind or tailwind, the slopes, should you be running uphill or downhill. And of course, if you were to train by paces and let's say go for a run at 5 minutes per kilometer pace, 8:30 minutes per mile, something like that, this pace would not be accurate running uphill, running downhill. You would have to adapt, or if you were not to adapt, then the effort that you would produce would be completely different for the same pace on the different segments of your run. Whereas the power number, if you keep it steady for the whole run, let's say it's a steady run with the same power number as a target, then you will be producing the same effort throughout the session, which sometimes is the goal. And if you have intervals, then same here, you would be pacing your intervals, should they be headwind or going uphill, with the same number, and that number would be consistent in terms of effort throughout the different intervals. The other advantage of the Stryd pod is that you have your threshold, the anaerobic one, not the aerobic one, that is moving throughout the year. It's auto-calculated. You can also do some tests, but on the Stryd app, you have the threshold that moves. It gets lower in off-season, winter, or if you're injured, and it gets higher with your fitness so that your training zones adapt automatically with that. Whereas if you were to train by heart rate or paces, you would have to perform, threshold tests very often to have your value evolving, which is not always very, handy or useful. And having the number evolving by itself automatically is quite nice. One of the big advantages of having that number evolving and that representation of where your threshold is that you also know what's the reserve capacity, the functional reserve capacity, so if you will, the battery that you have above that threshold. Essentially, you have a number that corresponds to the size of your anaerobic battery, that is the functional reserve capacity expressed in kilojoules, and that number is how much energy you have above your anaerobic threshold. So this is very useful, for instance, if you are doing a session and you want to see whether you depleted that battery above your threshold, you can check it. You can also see how you replenish that battery, and for instance, during an interval session, you deplete that battery, it replenishes with time, you deplete it again, and then you can have a ton of different applications of that. If you want to deplete it completely, let it replenish, or if you want to slightly deplete, replenish, slightly deplete, and so on. Many different stuff for different types of runners and goals, which is also very useful. And that is something that you have no equivalent in other systems. With lactate, you can play a bit with that, and I'm also a big fan of lactate, which combines quite well with power, but with heart rate or paces, above your threshold is above your threshold, and you do not know how much battery, how much energy you have there, and how you are depleting it. Whereas here you can monitor it, and that's really, really nice. One last thing is that the pod is also a very straightforward accelerometer, so you have a very precise pace, which in the end is also useful because should you be pacing yourself with power, in the end you also want to check what pace you're moving at, because you have goals in terms of time for your PRs, PBs. So that's cool, and the Stryd pod is actually the most accurate foot pod in terms of paces. So you also have your real-time instant pace on the watch, which it doesn't have all the interferences that GPS signals may have for your pace on the watch. Last but not least, tons of other metrics. I'm just gonna quote two of them. First one is running efficiency, not to be confused with running economy, which is something else. Running efficiency essentially shows how efficient you are, so how much power you are consuming to move at a certain pace, and that you can compare over time, seeing if you are becoming more efficient, or comparing between shoes, for instance, or even throughout a session, throughout a race, seeing how your efficiency is degrading, is going down because of fatigue. Other metrics include, for instance, leg spring stiffness. So it's a representation of how stiff the spring that is your leg is. The stiffer, the better, or the fresher, and that also can help you to monitor how you are getting fatigued throughout the session or throughout the race, or how you are improving in time. So, you know, and tons of other stuff. If you have questions about the Stryd Pod, I'm more than happy to answer all of them. It's a tool that I really love, and I hope that I gave you an overview of how you could be using it. 10 years ago in cycling, power meters were not a huge thing, maybe not 10 years, but 15 years ago. I believe in 10 years from now, most runners will be pacing themselves with power. I could be wrong, but I think this will happen, especially when all the major watch brands will have native power on their watches. That will become the standard simply because of all the advantages that I just listed. Thanks a lot for watching today, guys. Enjoy your run, enjoy your ride, go beyond your limits, and most importantly, take care. I'll see you tomorrow for another video of the Advent Calendar. Bye-bye.